CNN tries race baiting on JD Vance to try to get him to distance himself from Trump's remarks earlier this week about Kamala Harris, and it didn't go well for CNN. We'll show you exactly how JD Vance handled that. Also, is this Kamala Harris's economy? Is it Kamalanomics now? We'll talk about that. And Kamala Harris speaks finally for the first time to reporters without a script. It was a disaster. We'll show it to you. And we'll talk about all these things and more with this week's roundtable. Akash Chougule from Americans for Prosperity, Elaine Parker with Job Creators Network, and Angela Morabito, the former spokesperson for the Education Department. We're brought to you by Job Creators Network and Americans for Prosperity. My name's Larry O'Connor. It's time for the roundtable. And we begin today, as we always do on the roundtable, with a look at Salem News Channel This Week on the Hill. Majority Leader Steve Scalise was on this week, and he focused on the actual issues that are going to matter most to voters this November. Here, take a look.
What are the top three issues that you would say that Republican-leaning voters are focused on and concerned about?
Yeah, as we get closer to November, those top three issues, Tony, are crystallizing everywhere you go. And number one, far and away, is the border. People want to get this border secured. It's madness what's going on at the border. And that comes up no matter what part of the country you're in. The number two issue clearly is inflation, the cost of things. And, you know, wherever part of the country you go into, they're complaining about grocery prices. They're complaining about gas prices and energy prices, just cooling their home in the summer. I mean, these are problems that were created by the Biden and Harris administration. Everybody knows that. And so, you know, when you talk to families who are, you know, whether they're wealthy or poor, it's the same issues, Tony. And, you know, this is where Kamala Harris is going to have a real problem. She was with Joe Biden, helping be the architect. Look, she was the deciding vote for the Inflation Reduction Act. She can't run away from these things. You know, the policies that created the inflation, that when you go to the grocery store, you're paying 30% more than when Biden took office. That was Kamala Harris who helped cast that deciding vote. You know, when she brags that she wants to ban fracking, I don't know, maybe now when she goes to Pennsylvania, she might try to change her position on that too. But she's not going to be able to get away with that because she's on video saying that she wants to ban fracking, and it's raising the cost of energy. It's empowering Putin. Why would you give billions more to Putin and to Iran, the Ayatollahs there, to be able to fund their war machines? You know, and then she boycotts Netanyahu's speech. You know, this is something where the Biden-Harris administration has failed those basic voters, the low and middle income families who are struggling the most.
Yep, This Week on the Hill. If you didn't see the whole episode, please catch the entirety of it. So, Elaine, we'll start with you. That's a litany of policies right now that I think if you go back to the Republican National Convention, they were emphasizing it as well. This, I think, plays into a winning hand for the Republicans. What do you think?
Look, I think Republicans up and down the ballot can argue on very strong issues. President Trump himself can argue a very strong record. He's not going to be talking about what he's going to do if he wins the presidency. He can talk about what he did as president and how well Americans did under his administration. What Americans should also remember is that no matter who's at the top of the ticket, the problem is the Democratic failed policies that has resulted in historic inflation and hurt our small businesses, everyday ordinary Americans. We just had a poll come out of our small business owners. We do a national poll of small business owners, and 2/3 of them say that the economic situation could actually force them to close. But they've also identified the primary issues that are so important to them in this election. 60% of them say that inflation and the economy are the most important issues for them going into this election.
Yeah, and Akash, as you saw from Leader Scalise, he actually has obviously two agendas here. He wants to help the presidential ticket, but he'd like to grow his majority. And these issues help in his districts because these are kitchen table issues that all of these Americans are caring about, regardless of some of the bigger national things.
That's exactly right, Larry. As you know, we've been all over the country. Americans Prosperity has probably talked to more people between their phones and their doorsteps than any other organization or any other campaign in the country. I mean, we're north of 10 million voter contacts now over the last year and a half. with our Bidenomics campaigns and our other ongoing efforts. And over and over and over again, we hear the same issues that the leader talked about: border security and inflation. They are just crushing American families. And they couldn't be more concerned about what's going on. And I think the message is exactly right. If Republicans can stay focused on these things, they are going to win. If the election becomes about Trump's character or the Dobbs and democracy fights that Democrats want to talk about that are simply not actually high priorities for the American people, but are places where Democrats can define the narrative, then I think it's a bigger question. But if we stay focused on the issues that matter, I think conservatives are going to be in for a good November.
Yeah, Angela, listen, you're in the business of communications and being able to deliver messages. Is there a concern here, as we've often, and listen, trust me, there are plenty of people whose careers have been doomed by second guessing the way Donald Trump wins elections, because he's always second guessed and he does pretty well for himself. But there's a concern that he's focusing on the issues that matter most to him versus the issues that matter most to voters. Or do we often see them harmonize?
They've harmonized a lot. They certainly did in 2016, where he was called the blue-collar billionaire, helped propel him to the White House. But Akash touched on something really important, that so far this election has been virtually issueless. We're not talking about things like the economy, like the border, like education and healthcare that would normally be front page news because the political world has been so crazy. So it might have been an issueless election up until this point, but we're not leading issueless lives. As the congressman said in the clip that you played, everybody cares about their grocery bill, no matter who they are. Everybody sees prices rising. And if the GOP can hammer on the fact that Kamala Harris was there for all of it, she helped make this happen, that right there is a winning message.
Yeah, and I think throughout this program, actually, today, you're going to hear many people delivering that message. I got to take it back to Akash, though. You guys at AFP have invested a lot of money in the Bidenomics website. Are you getting Kamalanomics now? Is that an option for you? Did you already secure it?
Another allied organization of ours actually did that. And as you know, their imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But I think that's a really important point, which is that every single vote was essential. Kamala Harris cast the tiebreaker. You know, President Biden's name is on Bidenomics. He signed these things into law. Kamala Harris was a tie-breaking vote on the big spending bills, but every single Democratic senator who voted for these bills was essential in getting them there, right? Bob Casey and John Tester and Sherrod Brown, every single one of them cast a deciding vote for these policies. And so anyone who advocated for, helped craft, or voted for these big spending bills is to blame for the inflation crisis. That's a case that Republicans have got to make on the campaign trail, make them own the impacts that American families are feeling at the gas station and the grocery store every day.
Quickly back to you, Angela, because you can see what the Democrats are doing here. They want this election to be a personality election. They want it to be about who Kamala Harris is. Maybe that's why President Trump this week spent a lot of time questioning who Kamala Harris is. How do you do that as a communications expert? How do you pivot back and say, no, we don't want to talk about, you know, who this person is or what they represent. We want to talk about what they've done and how they've broken things.
Well, President Trump, if I had the president's ear, I would recommend to him that he stay laser focused on the things that are affecting everyday Americans. And that's not Kamala Harris's personality or how she speaks or how she identifies. It's none of those things. Now, the advantage that Kamala Harris has is a compliant legacy media. She hasn't really had to take questions. She has yet to face a difficult question. Nobody has asked her, do you sign off on the parts of the Biden administration that are hurting Americans in their wallets and in their lives and certainly in their schools? No one has asked her if she's going to do anything different than the same failed administration we have now. So if President Trump were to really hone in on that question until she is essentially forced to answer, to put her flag in the ground somewhere, I think the election and our political discourse is worse off for it because she hasn't had to account for what's gone wrong in this administration.
Yeah, and Elaine, ultimately, I want to bring it back to the down ticket races too, as we've already touched on, because beyond who sits in the Oval Office, growing a majority in the House right now is an agenda for the Republicans, and the Democrats are very vulnerable in the Senate. It all plays into those down ticket races.
Absolutely. And those the House and the Senate are going to be faced with an expiring Tax Cuts and Jobs Act next year. And so that bill is that piece of legislation is on the ballot this November because the Biden-Harris, Harris-Biden, whatever you want to call it, administration has promised to let that bill expire and it will just sunset. They don't have to do anything about it. And the poll I just referenced that we came out with, A clear majority of small business owners said that that bill helped their businesses, and more than 2/3 of them want to see it extended because they'll lose a 20% deduction, immediate expensing, all of those things that created a small business boom under the Trump administration will simply go away. And those are real issues. And Kamala Harris has been very clear on letting it expire. We are saying the same things we said a month ago about the economy, about the policies that are hurting people. Again, it does not matter who's at the top of the Democratic Party and the ticket, because it's the same failed policies.
Well said. We'll leave it there, but we'll move on to similar themes of the day here, where it comes to this election and whether this is going to lead with policy versus personality on election day. Keep it right here. For 2 decades, conservatives have chosen to partner with Americans for Prosperity to expand freedom and opportunity. AFP's grassroots movement has been delivering real, tangible results at the local, state, and national level to improve the lives of millions by lowering taxes, removing burdensome regulations, and expanding school choice, just to name a few wins. With more than 4 million advocates and local offices across the country, Americans for Prosperity is the largest, most effective grassroots organization in America. And now AFP is taking on Bidenomics and fighting to secure the border. See how you can join the movement to reignite the American dream at americansforprosperity.org. Well, as you know, Donald Trump caused a stir. He usually causes a stir wherever he goes, but he caused a stir at the National Association of Black Journalists this week by calling into question the authenticity of Kamala Harris at various levels, including her ethnic authenticity. Well, a reporter for CNN tried to nail JD Vance on this and well, frankly, was kind of race baiting him with regard to his own mixed race children. I want you to see what JD Vance was able to do. And one other thing, this was at a border visit that JD Vance was holding, something that Kamala Harris hasn't really done much of, especially considering she's the border czar. All right, let's watch JD Vance handle this question.
The former president's comments yesterday to the National Association of Black Journalists, where he said that Vice President Harris is, quote, all of a sudden black. As a father of 3 biracial children, did those comments give you pause at all?
They don't give me pause at all. Look, all he said is that Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She goes to Georgia 2 days ago. She was raised in Canada. She puts on a fake Southern accent. She is everything to everybody, and she pretends to be somebody different depending on which audience she's in front of. I think it's totally reasonable for the president to call that out, and that's all he did. I mean, look, she's running as a tough on crime prosecutor, even though she implemented open border policies. She's saying that she wants to support the police, yet she wanted to defund the police just 3 years ago. It's totally reasonable to call out the fact that she pretends to be somebody different depending on the audience she's talking to.
All right. I mean, deftly handled, I think. And really the crux of this is what she stood for just 5 years ago when she was running or when she was a senator. And this is what she's saying she stands for now. Who is the real Kamala Harris and what are her real issues? And we'll take it to the roundtable. I've got fracking, gun confiscation under the guise of a buyback, mandatory buyback, defunding the police, dismantling ICE, eliminating private health insurance, federal jobs guarantee, and propping up the government-controlled education system in this country and being beholden to the teachers union. That's just the start of some of the policies that she's been, at the very least, ambiguous on, if not completely flip-flopped on. So we'll start with you, Akash. This is a vulnerability with Kamala Harris, I think. It really just depends on how it's presented. And you saw 2 different versions there, the way Donald Trump did it earlier this week and the way JD Vance just did it there.
Absolutely. And to be clear, both of those are, I think, legitimate criticisms of Kamala Harris. I mean, again, as an Indian American, I am more annoyed than anyone when she tries to lean into her ethnic background when it's like politically convenient to do so. You see all this sort of fanfare around her. The fact of the matter is that Indian Americans don't play the victimhood Olympics the way Kamala Harris does. And so there actually is a massive disconnect there. And her policies have been a nightmare for all Americans, but particularly for Indian Americans who oppose affirmative action and really believe in meritocracy and all these things. But that gets to the bigger picture, right? Which is that what does she actually believe? What would she do as president? And we're just seeing endless gaslighting from her, from the media, from the Democratic Party, allowing her to rewrite her record from bills she's co-sponsored or led in the Senate issues she campaigned on as president, and then things this administration has done. You cannot let her pick and choose and decide all of a sudden what she believes when she has a lengthy track record in writing and on video of things she says and things she believes on important policies. I mean, Larry, just imagine if Mike Pence, for example, tried to renege on policy positions he took 4 years ago and then distance himself from the Trump-Pence administration. Do you think the media would give him a break on his policy beliefs? Of course they wouldn't. And so I think Vance is right to focus on the issues. And Kamala Harris, as Angela mentioned, she needs to answer tough questions. And I think if Republicans keep distracting themselves and talking about whether she's a DEI candidate and all that, we fail to nail her down on the things that matter, which is what does she believe? And what she believes are positions that are way, way to the left of the vast majority of Americans, and they deserve to know that. So let's focus on that.
Well, and Elaine, I think, some people watching might say, well, every politician flip-flops, but this is a litany of policies, critical policies that she's flip-flopped on in a very short time. And it also makes her more vulnerable, I think, you tell me, because of the nature in which she inherited this nomination. She didn't have to answer to the voters. So you get this sense that she's not beholden to we the people. She's beholden to the people who put her where she is.
Yeah, the issues that she's changing her positions on are fundamental issues that are very important to the American people, from the economy to healthcare. I mean, she was one of 14 Democratic senators who signed on and supported, was a sponsor to the Green New Deal. 14 senators, that's it, which calls for a single-payer healthcare government option, a government plan for everybody, regardless of whether or not you have insurance or not. I mean, we're all going to go into it under a Green New Deal. And during her 2020 run, she fully supported Medicare for all. I mean, those are her beliefs. And, it's funny because she's got now anonymous aides that are telling the media things like, the lefty reputation that she has really comes from that 2020 run where, it was really just kind of a distorting experience for everybody. What does that mean? I mean, we can look back at her reign in California and see that she was doing things like fighting for trans operations paid by taxpayer dollars in California for prisoners. I mean, there's no end to how left she is. She's a San Francisco, California elite politician, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, those are great points, I have to say. And you're right. It is remarkable to me, Angela, as a political strategy, her team has decided that the path of least resistance, the least damage, is to say, yeah, she was pretty much full of it 5 years ago. I mean, that's basically what they're saying here. And I don't know if that's sustainable.
I don't think it is, because these Democratic candidates don't like to answer hard questions, and they're rarely called upon to do so. 4 years ago, we had Hayden Biden. Now we have Kamala the Chameleon, who believes whatever is most popular in the room that she is in at that given moment. As Elaine mentioned, these are not small issues. She should have to state clearly and definitively what her position is. It reminds me of Nancy Pelosi saying, you have to pass this bill before we find out what's in it. You have to vote for Kamala, and then when she's the president, we'll find out what she really thinks. That is a gamble that the American people should not take. But look, it goes back to the difference between how Republicans and Democrats are treated in the media. When Republicans change position on something, it's, that's a flip-flopper. But when a Democrat gets called out, it's, they evolved. They're now enlightened to whatever it is they now claim to believe. So I am not a betting woman, but if I were, Larry, I would put some money down on Kamala claiming to evolve here in these next few months.
Oh, I love that. I love the evolution. But listen, it does pay to be a Democrat. You're not held to the same standards, as we know. Joe Biden in the primary said he wanted to ban fracking. Then in the general election, when Trump called him out on it, he said, I never said that. Nobody cared. And he won Pennsylvania. So let me go around the roundtable here, and we'll go back in reverse order, starting with Angela. Of the topics that she has now demonstrably flipped on, the Green New Deal fracking thing, the gun confiscation, defunding police, dismantling ICE, eliminating private health insurance, a guarantee for federal jobs, which she abandoned immediately, but that's like flat out Marxism. And let's also show her being beholden to the teachers union, as she kowtowed to them this week. What do you think she's most vulnerable at, Angela? What do you think is going to resonate most with voters?
Issue number one is going to be the border. Everyone knows that she was Biden's border czar, despite attempts to rewrite history there and say, oh, well, it was never really her job. Yes, it was. We were all there. We all remember. And everyone knows that every state is now a border state because the border is wide open. It makes every American less safe no matter where you live. And I think Republicans would be very smart to talk about this from the perspective of a women's issue. Sorry, guys, no disrespect. But I think everybody here and everybody watching knows that the safety risk is different when you are a woman, especially a woman living in a blue city. If you're in a sanctuary city, it is not a sanctuary city for you. I live in Atlanta. In Georgia, we had the murder, tragically, of Lake and Riley. That looms large in everyone's memory, and it should, because it was 100% preventable. And it was 100% caused by these lax border policies that aren't really policies at all. It's just, oh, we'll do nothing. This is an issue that affects every single American, and I think it is a major vulnerability for Vice President Harris.
Well, it certainly plays into the Trump-Vance hand as well. Elaine, what do you think is the most vulnerable issue here on Kamala's flip-flops?
I think that the economy is going to end up being her most vulnerable issue because she is tethered, anchored to the current economic policies of this administration. She supported it. I believe that KJP yesterday said that she is a partner with President Biden on all of these issues. And so she's not going to be able to get away from the fact that this economic disaster is of her making. Yeah.
And Akash, go ahead and have the last word.
I actually think there's some misconceptions here, which is one, I think her biggest vulnerabilities are on the issues where she doesn't flip-flop because she didn't think she needed to. For example, all these Biden spending bills, her being beholden to the teachers union, her wanting to raise taxes. These are not issues she actually flip-flopped on because she just holds these positions and she thinks they're popular. Let's make her own that. Let's call it that she flip-flopped on healthcare and the Second Amendment and all these other issues. But the fact that she's trying to own these positions over the last 4 years, let's make her own them because they're a nightmare and people hate Bidenomics. They should hate Kamalanomics too. But I think the other thing we can't take for granted, Larry, is that people already know a lot of these things, right? Like we all remember because we paid attention that Kamala is the border czar. We know that she cast the deciding vote in the Senate, breaking the tie on all these spending bills. It is so, so important for your right-leaning audience, for activists, for candidates, for campaigns. If they do not stick to this message and deliver it, people are not going to know this because the media is not going to tell them. And the media is going to allow Kamala to define herself however she wants. And she may be actually great on the stump for all we know and all we see and fine delivering canned lines. And so we have got to stick to the message of her flip-flops and making her own the things that she is still for and that she has the track record of, which is the Biden agenda of spending, special interest, union-driven politics that's making our life more expensive.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well said. The whole panel, well said. And the fact that we do know she's the border czar. We do know that she had this position. We have the video. It's sitting on our social media page. The fact that they're now trying to gaslight and say that, what you see and what you hear is not at all the reality, well, it puts us right back to everything they told us about Joe Biden's mental and physical capabilities. They're gaslighting. That's who they are, and they're continuing it. And that's also a major vulnerability and something that should be made an issue of. There are about 30 million small business owners in America, and they employ 60 million workers. No organization does a better job defending them on Capitol Hill and in states across the country than Job Creators Network. And never before have small business owners needed more defending. Heavy regulations, high inflation, higher interest rates, higher taxes, all caused by the policies of the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration. These policies aren't just crushing hardworking American families, they're crushing hardworking small business owners across America too. That's the lifeblood of our communities, and it's a driving force of our economy. If you own a small business, or if you work for a small business, or if you care about your local small business, you need to join the fight to support and defend them. To become a JCN freedom fighter, go to joinjcn.com. That's joinjcn.com. Now, there's no cost to you, and it'll really help mainstream businesses across the country. Learn how you can support your local small business and defend the American dream itself. Go to joinjcn.com right now. All right, Kamala Harris may be on the wrong side of the American people on so many issues, but she's got enthusiasm behind her now. At least that's what we're hearing from polls and from the media, who I think are sort of leading the charge in the enthusiasm. Here, take a look.
That Democrats were suffering from low enthusiasm, so enthusiastic about voting. So this is Democrats for Biden or Harris. Look at this. Back in February, just 62% of Democrats said they were enthusiastic about voting for Joe Biden. Look at this now. Woof. Up to 88% now say that they are enthusiastic about voting for Kamala Harris. That is a huge jump. That is a 26-point jump. Look at Trump during the same stretch. Republicans for Trump. It was 80% in February. Look, it's still fairly high at 82%. But compared to February, where Trump had this 18-point advantage, now we see Harris with a 6-point advantage. It's definitely for Democrats. Game on. They are very enthusiastic. We see it in the money being raised. We see it in the volunteer signs. And now we're seeing in the polling as well.
All right. So is the tail wagging the dog here? Is the much of this enthusiasm because the media is trying to generate the enthusiasm and not doing their job to ask tough questions? Or is this a genuine reaction for Democrats who, let's face it, recognize that Joe Biden had, at the very least, missed a step or two? We'll start with you, Angela. Is this a very real thing? I'm told in the New York Times today that the Kamala phenomenon, that's what they're calling it, which sounds like that song the Muppets used to sing, that it's real and it's tangible, and they're trying to do the Obama script all over again, it seems.
If you follow the money, the Kamala phenomenon is real. She has brought in a massive fundraising haul, far more than former President Trump has. That should be cause for concern for Republicans and conservatives. But you are right in that a lot of this enthusiasm isn't necessarily organic. It's being said, this is the trend. Everybody's doing this. And of course, more and more people jump on the bandwagon, whether that trend, quote unquote, is real or not. But I think Vice President Harris has very strategically been in front of audiences only that are very excited about her. It's why the American Federation for Teachers, or Federation of Teachers, rather, conference last week was one of her first big campaign stops, because she can reliably count on an audience there who loves her, and she gets to talk about how much she loves them. She gets to run this very positive sounding campaign, even though it's incredibly negative for the American people. And because of that, it's easy for the media to point to that and say, oh, look, they all love her. Of course they do. She's never been in front of a challenging audience that may not agree with her on every single thing she says.
Yeah, Akash, one of the polls leading into the Republican convention was that the majority of Americans hoped that they had a different choice. I mean, yeah, sure, you can choose between Trump and Biden. Who are you going to pick? And they made their pick in those polls. But given an alternative, they wished they had different nominees. Well, now they have their wish. Kamala Harris gets to benefit from that.
That's exactly right. And I think that's a lot of the enthusiasm you're seeing. I mean, yes, is she at some level rebuilding the Obama coalition on the left? Absolutely. But I think that's a big part of it, Larry. And I think Republicans should not kid themselves. I mean, if you think that Kamala Harris can't win this election because she's just like beyond incompetent and so far to the left, do not kid yourself. She absolutely can win this election based on the money, based on the enthusiasm, and how this campaign is run and how the Republicans and the Trump campaign approach it. You do not want to be stuck in the middle of November screaming, stolen election again because somehow incompetent Kamala Harris won the election. We've got to wisen up fast as far as how we go after her, the issues we attack her on, her track record, what we're telling the American people. And the other point that I would make, Larry, is that the importance of down ballot races just got way, way higher, right? Expanding the House majority and flipping the Senate. I mean, when President Trump was up by 7 points on Joe Biden, people would kind of say, well, look, at least the top of the ticket might go in the Republicans' direction. That is far from a guarantee now, especially if she picks Shapiro for her vice presidential candidate. It all comes down to Pennsylvania, obviously. So that might help them there. I think we've, again, got to wisen up, attack her on the issues where she's most vulnerable, which are the border and the economy, and pay close attention to those down ballot races, because neither Kamala Harris nor Democratic candidates are adequately being tied to Biden's track record. And we've got to start doing that fast as conservatives.
Yeah, Elaine, Akash sort of brings up the turnout factor, where if you've got the shiny new thing now that excites you at least more than Joe Biden did, that's going to affect turnout. And that's now going to be an issue that Republicans need to pay close attention to, right?
Absolutely. But turnout, if you dig a little deeper on what that means, it's turnout in the right areas.
Uh-huh.
And you should also remember that in 2016, Trump was outspent by Hillary Clinton, who was, another coronated, expected to win candidate, outspent by 2-1. And he still won because he was laser focused on the issues. And that's what he needs to do again. We actually think that whichever candidate wins the Hispanic vote is the candidate who's going to win the election. That is becoming the largest voting bloc in this country. They continue to grow as a voting bloc. In 2020, Trump took 36% of the Hispanic vote. He's now polling at about 42%. And if he can continue growing that sect in specific areas. That's why we're in battleground states like Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania and Colorado, in battleground counties, to get out the vote, to register small business, Hispanic small business owners, working with Hispanic Christian churches in those battleground areas, and we can get the vote out there. We will win this election and Trump will win it. It doesn't take millions of votes. It doesn't even take hundreds of thousands of votes. We're talking just probably a few thousand votes in any of those battleground states.
Well, and let me follow up with you with that, because I think you're right. I think the Hispanic vote is going to be sort of the hidden story in this election. So let's tie that to enthusiasm. I think Republicans actually line up well with most Hispanic voters on the issues that matter most to them. How do you motivate them? Because their turnout in the past has not been very stellar as a voting group. How do you motivate the Hispanic voters to let them know how critical this election is for them?
That's the point of the campaign. It's the Hispanic Vote Coalition. We're working with Bienvenido. We're also working with an organization that is tapped into about 40,000 Hispanic Christian churches. Yes, you're right. Hispanics believe in the same thing that non-Hispanic groups believe in. They believe in faith. They believe in family. They believe in freedom. And so what we're doing through this coalition is motivating them to vote their values. There's probably no other group that's been hurt more than this economy, than the Hispanic community, with historic inflation and high gas prices. And education is very important to them. And of course, the border is still a big issue for them, because the crime that is spilling over the border is coming into their communities and they don't like it. They're not happy with it, and they will vote their values. We just have to motivate them to get out. Yes, you're right. The polls are looking good for Trump in this area, but polls do not necessarily translate to votes. And that's why we're working hard in battleground areas.
Angela, first, and then back to Akash. Angela, you just heard Elaine mention education. You used to be the spokesperson for the education department. That is, I think, again, one of those stealth issues for Latino voters, because a huge number of them are in the government-run school systems, and they're not very happy with where things have gone in the last few years. Can Trump reach those voters with some new ideas on education?
He can reach those voters. He should reach those voters, but he doesn't necessarily need new ideas. He needs to lean on the education policies that he embraced during his first term, which were already working. It's things like education freedom for all, that every parent deserves the right to choose where their child will go to school and how that child will learn, not based on their zip code, not based on their street address, but based on what that child needs. That is the common sense solution in education. And the more he drives that home, the better he's going to do with key constituencies, not just Latino voters. Actually, some new polling data came out last week that said the only group, when you line up political affiliation and race, the only group that opposes education freedom are white Democrats. Minority Democrats are overwhelmingly in favor of school choice. So this isn't a partisan issue. It's a political one, certainly. But this is an issue that goes beyond party lines. And I think that any candidate would be right to embrace that. It's always right to do the right thing for America's students and families. But it's also politically beneficial. The benefits of school choice are impossible to ignore. And also, there's another key voting bloc here, suburban women. There's nothing these people care about more than their kids. And that's wonderful. That's part of what makes America great, is these strong families. So if the GOP drives home the message that your kids can't read and write, and Kamala Harris and her union buddies are perfectly content to keep it that way, that is going to be very, very motivating for all parents.
Yeah, those suburban women don't like mean tweets, though. So which one is going to overcome the other? Akash, I'm going to throw the hardest question to you here. Is this big enthusiasm push that we're now seeing in the polls for Kamala Harris, is it just the results of this little honeymoon she's enjoying? And it's just going to die out when things get real and it's going to be issue oriented? Or are they going to be able to sustain this whole personality play all the way to election day?
I think your question includes a big if, which is when things get real. And when things get real, is Donald Trump going to be talking about the issues that are Kamala Harris's weakness? Or is he going to keep talking about the things that she's talking about and allow her to make the conversation about defining herself as a glass shattering candidate? Because that's what he's doing right now, having this conversation about her background and how she got there and all that. It's playing into her hands. Now, we're talking a lot about these key constituencies, minority voters and suburban women. One of the sort of non-policy related things that these groups need to break from the Democratic Party is a permission structure, Larry, a social permission structure. Because right now in a lot of these groups, it's not popular to vote Republican. The way you create that permission structure is by talking about issues that they can go to their friends and neighbors in their community, other suburban women, other Hispanics, and say, I'm voting Republican because of this issue.
Yeah.
The longer this campaign is not about issues, the harder that permission structure becomes. And so again, it's obviously important to attack her on the issues, but there are very obvious political benefits for doing so among, as we've discussed, very, very small margins of groups that are needed to win swing states.
Akash gets the last word, but a great go around there. We'll see if the enthusiasm continues. We know the media is going to try their best. As has been noted in today's program, Kamala Harris has still not had any one-on-one interview with anyone in the media, let alone a press conference. She hasn't had any unscripted moment that isn't on a teleprompter and sort of created for the television cameras, except last night. We had one unscripted moment. We're going to take a look at it, but first, here's what the scene was. It was at Joint Base Andrews in Washington, D.C., first, she had her personnel set up a podium for her to speak from a binder. She couldn't just come out and just speak extemporaneously to the media. No, first they set up a podium, and then she walked over, and then she went to her binder, and then she opened her binder, and then she started giving her remarks. And then, after she gave her remarks, and it was time for the media actually to ask her some questions, she did this.
Thank you all. Madam Vice President, will you be meeting Evan and Paul when they return?
And that was that. No questions from the media. I mean, she did demonstrate that she could walk up the larger flight of stairs to the airplane, so I guess there's that. Then later in the evening, as the rescued hostages that were imprisoned in Russia were returned to their families in a fantastic and very patriotic American scene, Kamala Harris was there, and here was her moment. Here was her moment to say something to the media for the first time since being placed in this position as the presumptive nominee for the Democrats. She had an unscripted moment. Let's take a look.
This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day.
Wow. That was, well, maybe this is why she's not unscripted. Akash, we'll start with you. That's Kamala Harris.
I'm almost as much of a loss for words as she was in that little segment. Russia is not our ally. I don't know what she's talking about. Yes, obviously diplomacy matters, and it was a fantastic day to get those Americans back home after what has just been an absolute nightmare situation. But again, Larry, the media is going to allow her to do this. And so we can sit here and complain about them all we want. It is on us to prosecute the case against Democrats up and down the ballot. Americans for Prosperity has been doing it in states across the country with the Bidenomics campaign, holding these Democratic senators and members of the House accountable who voted for the spending bills, talking about the border crisis at secureborder.secureamerica.com. We've got real solutions. We've got to point out the problems they created, the solutions that we have as conservatives, because again, if it's just a scripted campaign about the historic nature of who she is and how great she is in front of a teleprompter, make no mistake, she could win this election again. But if we make it about the issues where they're vulnerable, demand and force her to answer tough questions, and Democrats who are running for Senate, running for House, running for governor, running for local dog catcher, own Bidenomics, own the inflation crisis, own the border crisis, then conservatives are going to be fine. Otherwise, she'll do exactly what she did in that first clip, get up in front of a teleprompter and be better than Joe Biden and maybe even better than Donald Trump. And that might be all the American people need to see.
Yeah, listen, Elaine, I agree. We got to do this, and you want to press her on the issues. But if the media isn't going to do their job, we have to point it out, and we have to, if it's possible, shame them into actually stepping up and vetting this person. She wants to be president.
Absolutely. I sent that same clip to my team this morning because I said the real Kamala is still in there when she doesn't have the teleprompter. And it made me recall how much Barack Obama was criticized when he ran in the first time about his teleprompter use. But there's a difference between Barack Obama and Kamala Harris, as much as they're trying to make her the new Barack Obama, is that Barack was relatable to Americans. He also could speak from the cuff. He did well on interviews, obviously with friendly media, but he did do well speaking from the cuff. He just did really depend on a teleprompter when he was giving a speech. Kamala showed again that when she's not on that teleprompter, she really can't speak. And so the media does need to hold her accountable. And if they won't, then conservatives need to keep talking about Bidenomics. And it's okay to still call it Bidenomics because she has supported all of those policies. She is anchored to those policies. She cannot run from those policies. She supports high taxes. She supports big spending. She supports big government. And nothing she says or does or her campaign officials say will change any of that.
Yeah, and Angela, again, as a spokesperson for a cabinet level department, the Department of Education, you know that words matter and how you communicate words matter. Let me just read you this quote that we just saw from Kamala Harris. This is an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy.
That word salad would not have gotten her far on the Miss America stage, but it's terrifying that it might get her far. Seriously, those women are amazing. That's a separate conversation. But if that's what we're getting from Kamala in an advantageous situation when she's got a friendly media, she's at a happy event with something big to celebrate. I don't want to take away from how wonderful it is to get those folks home, to bring those Americans back. If that's the Kamala we see, what about the Kamala we don't see? What happens when she doesn't have the binder, when she doesn't have the prompter, when she's having to negotiate on behalf of this country in foreign relations situations? I would be terrified about what comes out of her mouth then and what the ramifications are for this entire country.
Well, a point taken. And actually, listen, of course, it was a fantastic thing to see these families reunited with their loved ones. But wasn't this also an opportunity? I mean, if you really do want to be a statesman, if you really want to, be seen as a potential president of the United States, Akash, this would have been a great opportunity to say, by the way, there are Americans and innocent Israelis being held right now by terrorists since October 7th, and let's get those hostages home too. I call on Hamas to do that, or however you want to get it done. But instead of the word salad, how about actually show some leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, she's just unprepared for the job. She's unprepared when it comes to knowing what the job takes, to having the right positions, to being able to communicate to the American people. I mean, these are just very basic 101 skill set things that are required to be an effective president. She cannot do it. I think that's very, very clear. It becomes very clear every time, she's in any kind of unscripted environment. I don't think Donald Trump, frankly, should be afraid to debate Kamala Harris. He's got to be the one to pin her with these questions if the media won't do it. And again, I think the American people just see that every single time she gets up in any kind of scenario like that. And so the media should be creating more scenarios like that to ask her questions and ask her where she stands and what she believes. And can she truly be a statesman to represent us on the world stage? But if they won't do it, conservatives will. Yeah.
And Elaine, last word here, but it does feel like, they're sort of setting this up for 2020. Joe Biden was able to duck from a lot of very real media encounters because he was famously in the basement due to the pandemic, we were told. And it was revealed later that many of the interviews he conducted, he actually had notes in a teleprompter in front of him. sort of feels like they're trying to recreate that magic.
Yeah, clearly the staff there is very skilled at keeping their candidate under wraps and not putting them in any kind of position where they actually have to speak off the cuff and tell us who they really are. They did that for 3.5 years with Joe Biden, and the American people front and center saw it, and the debate that he had with President Trump makes you wonder if it wasn't done on purpose by his own staff. But they were going to do everything they can to keep Kamala under wraps. I bet that she even tries to find a way to get out of debating President Trump if she can, but we'll see how that goes.
Interesting. We sure will. And it does make you wonder whether that very rare early debate was not planned out and on purpose. You're right. And whether she will face a debate. I know that President Trump specifically wants the debate between he and Vice President Harris to happen before any early voting begins. And I think that's a very smart demand, and he should stick to it. Well, we had a really bad jobs report today, and that doesn't help since the economy is trying its hardest to get back on stride. But these jobs numbers aren't going to help things. Let's turn to this morning's Mornings with Maria to get some analysis. First, is the economy and the jobs and inflation, is this really Kamala Harris's economy? Well, here's a compelling argument to say yes, it is.
This is, most people don't know the ins and outs of an election and sort of, what's going on behind the scenes, but they know how much ground beef costs them, eggs cost them, bread costs, and they are sick of it. Kamala Harris is distancing herself from all of it. You say that the vice president owns President Biden's economy and she'll keep it going. Explain.
Well, if, as we saw from the debate, President Biden has not been running things, for the past, who knows what it's months or years. So it could only have been the vice president who was in charge. And let's go back. The Vice President Harris, there was the deciding vote for the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes, that's right.
So she owns those. They would not have passed. It was 50-50. She broke the tie.
Yes, she did.
Those caused the great inflation. She was the border czar. That immigration. So, I've talked about interest rates, inflation, and immigration are the things killing working class America. Tell me which one of those she doesn't own.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with this. We've got another clip from that show as well, but I think that's a compelling argument. It's like we clearly see now, Elaine, that President Biden was mentally, if not also physically, somewhat compromised, if not incapacitated for much of his presidency. So if that's the case, who was deciding things? And since she's the number two, this is her economy. Is that a fair point?
Absolutely. She's tethered to this administration's policies. She's the vice president of the United States, and she supports these policies. She supports high taxes. She supports big government spending, reckless spending. She supports mandates on EVs. She supports all of these policies that have led to historic inflation. And that's the reality. And we just have to keep reminding Americans about what she supports and what her positions are, because her positions are President Biden's positions.
Yeah, there's no sunlight there. And she certainly, I would love for somebody to ask her, where do you differ in your policies from what Joe Biden has done with the economy? But real quickly, a follow-up with you, since you're with Job Creators Network, today's jobs numbers were down again, and they've readjusted past months' numbers. It always seems to be readjusted in one direction, right? They always have a very different outlook on jobs, and then they have to be fixed for the headlines.
Absolutely. 114,000 jobs created in this month's report, and well below the average reports, and well below expectations. The unemployment rate jumped up. And also, of course, as you mentioned, the last month's jobs reports were adjusted down. It happens every single solitary month. The jobs are adjusted downward from the previous month. And when there was a study done by Daily Caller Foundation, I believe, they looked at all of 2023 and found that the jobs were adjusted down by 1 million jobs cumulatively throughout 2023. That is substantial. How can these jobs reports be so wrong? It's actually worse than the weather report.
Yeah. Well, they'll fix that and adjust it in the other direction when there's a Republican in the White House. Akash, It's been stated and it needs to be restated that that Inflation Reduction Act did not reduce inflation. In fact, it made things worse. And the original stimulus package, the stimmy checks, really put us into this hole. Kamala Harris has her fingerprints on all of those things.
And there's more to come, Larry. People may not realize we're facing a massive fiscal cliff in 2025. Not only are major provisions of the Trump tax cuts expiring, so Democrats could get a major tax hike put on the vast majority of American families if they are in control, but we're facing a debt ceiling fight again, a fight over government funding, the expiration of expanded ACA subsidies. So there's a number of tax and spending issues all coming to a head next year, which could either result in another massive increase to the cost of living for Americans, a massive tax hike, more massive deficits, and more inflation, or we could right the ship, cut spending, build on tax reform, get healthcare in the right direction. And so that fiscal cliff in 2025 is a major inflection point that will determine the direction of our economy and the well-being and prosperity of American families for a very long time to come. And so, again, yes, she was a deciding vote on creating the crises that we are facing now in the economy, but there's plenty more opportunity for her to make things worse with her Democratic allies if they win in November. And so, again, we've got to stay focused on the issues. Conservatives have got to make sure that voters understand that Kamala Harris owns these policies, Democrat senators own these policies, and that they could make things worse versus conservative solutions could make things better for them with the inflection points coming in 2025.
Yeah, Angela, I want to turn to one more part of Maria Bartiromo's show today. They had their own roundtable, a lot more people there. It looks like the Brady Bunch. But I want you to see something that I think does not bode well for Democrats if this truly is the mood of the country. Take a look.
The markets are no longer worried about inflation. Instead, they are becoming worried about the possibility of a recession. My goodness, if you get 3 consecutive monthly readings on job gains that are less than 125,000, we only had 114,000 for the month of July. I'm beginning to smell a recession coming into view if that's the case. This jump by the unemployment rate, my goodness, 4.3%. This is up sharply from, not long ago. Where was it? At 3.5, 3.6%. This is a bearish report for the U.S. economy. The market has it right. We have strong reason to be worried about the sustainability of corporate profits looking ahead.
Angela, I mean, when they start throwing the R word around, that's the last thing they want, the Democrats, as they're heading toward this 90-day stretch ahead of us.
It wasn't long ago that they were all running from the T word, transient. It was actually running toward it. And I remember joking long ago that transient really meant sometime between this very moment and the heat death of the universe, because it wasn't looking transient. And now instead of getting better, it's getting worse. Those jobs numbers are devastating. Same with the unemployment rate. But when it comes to voters, I honestly believe that the only jobs number that matters is one. It's the one job you have or the one job you want. And if you have 0, you're in big trouble. But so many people are having to take on 2 and 3 jobs to afford to live in the Biden economy. So I'm going to stick with this through Election Day, that the one jobs number that matters is the one you want, the one you have, or trying to get. And for so many people, that is way harder than it needs to be. Everyone I know who is looking for a job in the private sector, particularly recent grads, are having a really terrible time. So these jobs numbers might have come as a surprise to the folks in Washington, but they certainly were not a surprise to anyone I know.
Well, and Akash, I know your organization is not DC. It's not just DC based. You've got satellite organizations all across the country, and you're talking with and engaging with these voters. How important is it here for Republicans that it's not just about trying to make this case every 4 years about their ideas being better than the Democrats, but they can actually point and say, listen, this guy who we nominated was the president. This is what it was, not just some sort of, hey, we'll do this if you put us in office. No, this is what we did when we were office. That's got to have a little bit more resonance with voters, I would think.
Absolutely. It's the economy of 2017 to 2019 that people recall was very strong. They see it happen in their states every day, right? There's a reason people are fleeing California for Texas and for Florida, fleeing New York for Florida, North Carolina, Arizona. The story is very, very clear. It just needs to be told. And again, that inflection point coming next year, Kamala Harris has been very clear. Democrats have been very clear. They want to raise the corporate tax rate back to 35%. They want to raise taxes on small business. Economists, even from the left, agree. The burden of business taxes, of the corporate tax, is largely borne by workers' wages. And so higher business taxes, higher corporate taxes means slower wage growth, fewer job opportunities, less economic growth. Given the way the jobs numbers look today, that is the last thing we can afford. And people need to be reminded of that, have explained to them, again, in simple terms. I love Angela's description of the one job that matters. That one job is less likely to be there every time we talk about raising taxes, because businesses have less and less confidence in the economy that they're operating in.
Yeah, and Angela, that I'll bring it back to you. Or excuse me, Elaine, I'll bring it back to you for the final word, because with Job Creators Network, I know that when you point out that so many of the new job creations are government jobs, that doesn't help Main Street. That doesn't help the small communities around this country. And I think JD Vance has been put on this ticket to sort of try to speak to those issues and try to speak about growing those communities, because that's sort of been his public life since he wrote Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, absolutely. These jobs that are coming from government sector, they don't come from innovation and entrepreneurship. If they're coming from the government, that is not going to drive the GDP or consumer spending. And what you need to remember is that 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending, and Americans are beginning to break under this inflation and this cost of living crisis. What we know is that American credit card debt is at an all-time high, about $1.3 trillion out there in credit card debt. And American savings, personal savings, is at an all-time low. And those are not good statistics to have going into an election if you're in an incumbent administration.
It's almost like Main Street matters, Elaine. I don't know why. It's just that phrase is in my head right now as we speak. Main Street. Would you agree that Main Street matters?
Main Street always matters.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Roundtable. A great Friday. I appreciate you joining us today. And I'll just sum it up with this. I got to be honest. I've been watching politics for many, many, many years as an observer of this country's elections. And it's been a long time since the pocketbook, kitchen table, fundamental, get me to the end of the month and pay my bills kind of issues have aligned so perfectly with the American people's concerns and with the Republican Party's solutions. And if this election coming up all the way down ticket is about those issues and the Republican solutions to those issues, this could be a historic election for the Republican Party. It's not about that. If it's about personality, if it's about race, if it's about checking boxes, if it's about identity politics, well, let's just say it'll be a tougher conversation to have in November.